before he ever healed the sick, before he ever walked on water or fed the thousands or raised the dead, before any of it. Jesus stood in a small workshop in Nazareth and grieved the death of his Father. Not his Father in heaven, his Father on earth, Joseph, the man who had raised him, the man who had taught him a trade, who had protected him, who had been there since before he was born, the quiet carpenter who, the Gospels tell us, took a frightened pregnant girl as his wife and claimed her child as his own. And then, somewhere in the hidden years, before the ministry, before the cross, Joseph died, and Jesus, still a young man, had to face the first great loss of his life. We have to be honest from the very start. The Gospels do not describe Joseph's death. They do not tell us when it happened, or how, or what was said. Joseph simply disappears from the story sometime after Jesus turns 12, and by the time the ministry begins, he is gone. The silence is total. But that silence is not empty, because we know things. We know the customs of their world, how a family grieved, how a son buried his father, what fell on the shoulders of the eldest son when the father of the house died. We know the earliest traditions of the church, which treasured the memory of Joseph's passing. And we know the heart of the young man who would one day weep at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, a young man who knew how to grieve. Because grief is human, and he was fully human. In this video, drawing on the Gospels, on the customs of first-century Galilee, and on the earliest traditions of the church, we are going to reconstruct one of the most overlooked moments in the entire life of Jesus: the death of the man who raised him, and what the young Jesus did when his father died. A note before we begin. Scripture is silent on Joseph's death. So much of this is a careful reconstruction, built from what we know of their world and the earliest traditions. Where we are imagining, we will say so. And to understand what Joseph's death meant to Jesus, we first have to understand who Joseph was to him. Because the bond between this father and this son began before Jesus was even born. Joseph was a carpenter, a tekton in the Greek of the Gospels, a craftsman who worked with wood and stone, building doors, yokes, roof beams, furniture, the everyday things a village needed. It was honest, skilled, physical work, and it was not the work of a wealthy man. Joseph was, by every measure, an ordinary working man in an ordinary village. But the Gospels tell us something extraordinary about this ordinary man, something that reveals his whole character. When Joseph was betrothed to Mary, he discovered she was pregnant, and the child was not his. In their world, this was catastrophic. He had every right to expose her publicly, to shame her, even to have her punished severely under the law. But the Gospel of Matthew tells us Joseph was a just man, and that he resolved instead to divorce her quietly, to spare her disgrace. Even before he understood anything, his first instinct was mercy. And then he had a dream. An angel told him the truth, that the child was from the Holy Spirit, that he should not be afraid to take Mary as his wife. And Joseph, a man who never speaks a single recorded word in any of the four Gospels, simply obeyed. He woke, and he did exactly as he was told. He took Mary into his home. He claimed her child as his own. Think about what that decision meant. Joseph chose to take on a child who was not biologically his. He chose to face the whispers of the village because people would count the months, and they would talk. He chose to give Mary and her son the protection of his name, his home, his standing as a man. Without Joseph, Mary would have been a disgraced, unmarried mother with nothing. With him, she had a family, and the child she carried had a father. And Joseph kept choosing them again and again in the hardest moments. When King Herod sought to kill the child, it was Joseph who was warned in a dream. Joseph who rose in the dead of night. Joseph who led his family across the desert into Egypt to save the boy's life. He became a refugee to protect a son who was not his by blood. He uprooted his whole life, fled to a foreign country, and started over from nothing for this child. And when the danger passed, it was Joseph who brought them home. Joseph who settled them back in Nazareth. Joseph who built the life in which Jesus would grow up. Every door in that house, every stick of furniture, the very roof over their heads, Joseph made or provided. He was the protector, the provider, the quiet foundation under the whole family. And here is the thing the Gospels never say in words, but show us in everything. Joseph loved this boy as his own son, not as if his own, as his own. There is no hint anywhere that Joseph treated Jesus as a stepchild, as someone else's. He raised him, taught him, protected him, and, as we will see, gave him the trade that would define Jesus' entire early life. Joseph was, in every way that matters, his father. And the bond between them was forged in the place where fathers and sons in their world spent their days together. The workshop. In the world of first-century Galilee, a son learned his father's trade. It was how it worked. The father taught the son everything he knew, passing down the skill of generations, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. And so the Gospels tell us that Jesus, too, was known as a carpenter, the carpenter's son, and a carpenter himself. He learned the trade from Joseph. Picture those years. They are some of the most overlooked years in all of history, and yet they shaped the Son of God into a man. Joseph teaching Jesus how to choose good timber, how to hold a tool, how to make a joint that would hold for a lifetime, how to be patient with the wood, how to measure twice, how to take pride in honest work. The hands that would one day heal the sick and break the bread were first taught their skill by a carpenter named Joseph. And it was not only a trade Joseph taught him. In their world, the father was the one who taught the son the scriptures, who led the prayers in the home, who took the boy to the synagogue, who modeled what it meant to be a faithful man of Israel. Every Sabbath, every festival, every daily prayer. Jesus would have learned the rhythm of faith first from Joseph, watching his father pray, listening to his father read the words of the prophets. Think about the strange and beautiful mystery in that. The one Christians believe was the Son of God learned to pray in human words, partly by watching a village carpenter. The eternal Word learned the scriptures, as a boy, from Joseph reading aloud by lamplight. There is something almost overwhelming in the humility of it. That God, becoming human, would learn the things humans learn in the ordinary way, from an ordinary faithful man. And here is a thought worth sitting with. When Jesus later taught the crowds, he spoke constantly about a father. He told a story about a father running to embrace a lost son. He taught people to pray to God as Father. He spoke of a father who knows what his children need before they ask. Where did a young man learn what a good father is? He learned it, in human terms, from Joseph. The tenderness, the protection, the patient teaching, the quiet provision. Jesus had lived inside that kind of fatherhood every day of his early life. When he wanted to show people what God's love is like, he reached for the image of a father. And somewhere behind that image stood the carpenter who had raised him. And the years went on. The boy became a youth. The youth grew toward manhood. And all through those years, the Gospels are almost completely silent. The famous hidden years of Jesus, in which we are told only that he grew and became strong and increased in wisdom, and that the favor of God was upon him. Behind that single sentence lies perhaps 20 years of ordinary life. 20 years of Joseph and Jesus in the workshop, of meals at Mary's table, of Sabbaths and festivals and the quiet rhythm of a family. These were the years that no gospel records, and yet they were the longest part of their life together. The vast majority of Jesus' life on earth was spent not preaching to crowds, but in that small house and that small workshop, with Joseph and Mary doing ordinary work. And the man at the center of that ordinary world, the one who anchored it, who provided for it, who taught and protected and led it, was Joseph. There is one moment, and only one, that the Gospels give us from those years. And it tells us something important about the family. When Jesus was 12, the family traveled to Jerusalem for Passover, and on the way home, the boy was missing. For 3 days, Mary and Joseph searched in terror until they found him in the temple. And notice, it was Mary who spoke, but she said, "Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Your father. She meant Joseph. To the family, to the village, to the boy himself. Joseph was his father, fully, without qualification. And then, after that one glimpse, the silence returns. And the next thing we know, the very next thing, is that Joseph is gone. Here is one of the quiet mysteries of the Gospels. Joseph is present all through the early story: the betrothal, the birth, the flight to Egypt, the return, the temple when Jesus is 12. And then he simply vanishes. He is never mentioned again as a living person. He is not at the wedding at Cana. He is not there during the ministry. He is not at the cross. And the Gospels give us one detail that makes his absence unmistakable. At the very end, as Jesus hangs dying on the cross, he looks down at his mother and at the disciple John, and he entrusts Mary to John's care. "Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother." And from that hour, John took Mary into his own home. Think about what that tells us. If Joseph had still been alive, there would have been no need for this. A wife belonged with her husband. Jesus would not have given his mother into another man's care if her husband were still living. The fact that he had to make provision for Mary, that she was, in effect, a widow needing protection, tells us plainly that by the time of the crucifixion, Joseph was dead. So somewhere in that long stretch of silence, after Jesus was 12, and before the ministry began around the age of 30, Joseph died. We are not told the year. We are not told the cause. The earliest traditions suggest Joseph was older than Mary, perhaps significantly so, which would mean he died of age, in the natural course of things, while Jesus was a young man, still living and working at home. And here is what that means. When you sit with it, it means that the death of Joseph almost certainly happened during the hidden years. In that small house, in that quiet village, with only the family present. No crowds, no gospel writer recording it. Just an ordinary family facing the most ordinary and most devastating of human events, the death of a father. And it means that the young man who was there, who almost certainly cared for Joseph as he aged, who was present when he died, who buried him, was Jesus. Because think about the situation. Jesus was, as far as the village knew, Joseph's eldest son. And in that world, when a father aged and weakened, it was the eldest son who bore the responsibility. The son who took over the workshop. The son who provided for the household. The son who cared for the dying father, who closed his eyes at the end, who saw to his burial. All of that would have fallen to Jesus. So while the Gospels are silent, the shape of what happened is not really in doubt. In the years before he began his public mission, Jesus watched his earthly father grow old. He likely took over the carpentry, providing for the family with his own hands. He cared for Joseph as he declined, and when the end came, he was there. The Son of God sat at the deathbed of the carpenter who had raised him. Now let us do what the Gospels do not, and gently imagine the death of Joseph, built from the customs of their world and the tender traditions the early church preserved. Because while we cannot know the details, we can know the shape of it. And the earliest Christian traditions held that Joseph died one of the most peaceful deaths imaginable, surrounded by the two people who loved him most: Mary, his wife, and Jesus, the son he had raised. Picture the scene as the traditions and the customs suggest it. An old man, his strength gone, lying in the small house in Nazareth. He has worked with his hands his whole life, built doors and beams and yokes, provided for his family, fled to Egypt and back, raised a son who was not his by blood and loved him as his own. And now his long, faithful, ordinary life is coming to its end. And beside him, the young man he raised. Imagine Jesus there, holding the hand of his dying father. The same hands Joseph had once guided across the wood, now holding the old man's hands as his breathing slowed. What does a son do at the deathbed of his father? He stays. He holds on. He says the things that need saying. He gives comfort. And surely Jesus, who loved more deeply than anyone who ever lived, did all of it. Did he speak words of comfort? Did he pray over him? Did Mary weep, and did her son hold her too? We are not told, but we know this family. We know the love that bound them, and we can be certain that Joseph did not die alone or unloved. He died in the arms of the Holy Family, with his wife and his son beside him. And there is something almost beyond words in this. When you hold it in the light of who Christians believe Jesus was. Because if Jesus was truly the Son of God, then Joseph died with the author of life himself holding his hand. The one who would conquer death was present at the deathbed of the man who raised him. No one in history has ever had a death attended like that. The carpenter of Nazareth, an ordinary working man, breathed his last with God incarnate at his side, grieving him. This is why, in the traditions of the church, Joseph became known as the patron of a peaceful death, of dying well, surrounded by love. Because the tradition remembered Joseph's passing as the model of how a faithful person hopes to die. Not alone, not in fear, but at peace, with those you love beside you, your life's work done, your family safe. Joseph died, the tradition holds, in the arms of Jesus and Mary. And countless people ever since have prayed for a death like his. And then he was gone. The quiet carpenter who never speaks a word in the Gospels, who asked for nothing, who simply obeyed and protected and provided and loved. Joseph died. And the young man he had raised was left to do what every grieving child must do: to say goodbye, to bury him, and to carry on. But before we follow Jesus into that grief, sit a moment longer in what this death meant. Because there is a depth here that is easy to rush past. Joseph was the first person Jesus ever lost. Think about that. In all the years of his life up to this point, Jesus had not yet buried anyone he loved. And the first death to touch him directly, the first grave he ever stood over, was his own father's. There is a particular weight to the first great loss of a life. The moment the world first teaches you that the people you love can be taken, that nothing here lasts forever. Jesus learned that lesson the way we all do, by losing someone irreplaceable. And consider what was lost beyond the man himself. Joseph was the keeper of the family's security. As long as Joseph lived, Jesus was a son in his father's house, protected, guided, with someone older and wiser standing between him and the full weight of the world. The death of a father moves a young man across an invisible line. Suddenly, there is no one ahead of you anymore. Suddenly, you are the one others lean on. Jesus crossed that line when Joseph died. The boy who had been taught and protected became the man who would teach and protect. And it happened, as it happens for so many, at a graveside. There is also something to be said about how Joseph died versus how Jesus would die. Joseph's death, the tradition holds, was the gentlest imaginable. Old age, his family around him, peace, his life's work done. It was the death we would all choose, and it stands in such contrast to the death his son would one day face. Young, violent, public, abandoned by most of his friends. The father was granted the peaceful end. The son would be denied it. But in those quiet years in Nazareth, before any of that, Jesus was simply a young man who had been given the gift of a father who died well, surrounded by love. And he would carry the memory of that peaceful death into his own, far harder one. So what did Jesus do when Joseph died? The Gospels do not tell us. But the customs of their world tell us exactly what would have fallen to him as the eldest son. And the heart of the man tells us how he would have done it. First, he would have grieved. Truly grieved. We must not skip past this, because it matters enormously. Christians believe Jesus was fully God, but also fully human. And a fully human young man who loses the father who raised him feels it the way any of us would. The crushing weight, the disbelief, the hollow ache of a world suddenly missing someone who had always been there. And we have proof that Jesus grieved like this. Real, human, tearful grief. Years later, when his friend Lazarus died, the Gospel of John records the shortest and one of the most powerful verses in the whole Bible. Jesus wept. He stood at the tomb of a friend and he cried. If he wept for a friend, imagine what he felt at the death of the father who raised him. The same tears, the same fully human heart, broken by loss. And there is something worth noticing in that Lazarus story that connects straight back to Joseph. When Jesus wept at the tomb, the people watching said, "See how he loved him." They knew what his tears meant. They meant love. Tears are the proof of love. We only grieve what we have loved. So when we imagine Jesus grieving Joseph, we are not imagining weakness. We are imagining the deepest love. His grief for Joseph would have been the exact measure of how much he loved the man who raised him. And by every sign, he loved him completely. Then, in their world, came the immediate work of burial. In first century Galilee, burial happened quickly, usually within a day. And the duties fell to the family, especially the eldest son. Jesus would have helped prepare Joseph's body, washing it, anointing it with oil and spices, wrapping it in linen cloths. The hands Joseph had taught their trade now performed the last act of care for the man who taught them. Think about the tenderness and the pain of that. Jesus, washing and wrapping the body of his father. The same intimate, loving care a child gives a parent at the end. He would have done it himself or helped, because that is what a son did. And because love demands to perform these final acts itself rather than hand them to strangers. And there is a quiet echo here that the early Christians would not have missed. Joseph's body was washed, anointed with spices, and wrapped in linen, then laid in a tomb. Years later, the body of Jesus himself would be washed, anointed with spices, and wrapped in linen, and laid in a tomb. the son who tended his father's burial, would one day receive the very same care at the hands of those who loved him. There is a strange tenderness in that symmetry. Jesus knew exactly what was done for the beloved dead, because he had done it himself for Joseph. Then the burial itself. The body would have been carried to the family tomb, likely a cave or a rock-cut tomb where the family's dead were laid. The community would have gathered, as villages do, to mourn with the family. And Jesus, as the eldest son, would have led the family in the rituals of grief, the prayers, the mourning, the laying of his father to rest. And then came the part that is hardest of all, and that every grieving person knows. After the burial, after the mourners go home, after the rituals end, life has to go on. And it went on for Jesus the way it goes on for everyone who has lost a parent. He woke up the next morning in a house that no longer held his father. He walked into a workshop where Joseph would never stand again. He picked up the tools his father had taught him to use, and he kept working, because the family still had to eat, and he was the provider now. And here is something deeply moving to consider. For some years after Joseph's death, we do not know how many, Jesus most likely continued as the carpenter of Nazareth, providing for his widowed mother, running the workshop his father had left him. The Son of God spent years after his father's death, simply being a faithful son, working with his hands, caring for his mother, keeping the household together. Before he ever preached a word, he carried his family through grief and provided for them, day after ordinary day. That is what Jesus did when Joseph died. He grieved. He buried his father with his own hands. And then he carried on, caring for his mother, providing for his family, bearing the loss the way every human being must, in the quiet, ordinary days that no one records. Why does this overlooked moment matter so much? Why should we care about the death of a carpenter that the Gospels do not even describe? Because it shaped the man. And it shaped the way he would one day meet everyone else's grief. Think about it. When Jesus later stood before grieving people, the widow of Nain, weeping behind the body of her only son, the sisters Martha and Mary, devastated at the tomb of their brother Lazarus, all the broken-hearted who came to him, he was not meeting their grief as a stranger to it. He knew it from the inside. He had buried his own father. He had felt the hollow ache, the empty chair, the world made smaller by a death. When he wept with the grieving, he wept as one who had grieved. There is a profound comfort in this for anyone who has ever lost someone, because it means that when Christians speak of Jesus understanding human suffering, they are not speaking of a distant God who only watched from above. They are speaking of someone who sat at a deathbed, who washed a body for burial, who walked home from a grave to an emptier house, who knew exactly what it is to lose someone you love and have to keep living anyway. He understands grief because he grieved. And consider what the death of Joseph did in practical terms, how it positioned everything that came after. When Joseph died, Jesus stepped into the role of provider and head of the household. For years, he cared for Mary and kept the family. And then, when the time came for him to leave and begin his mission, he had to do something hard. He had to leave his widowed mother behind. But notice, he did not leave her unprovided for. He had brothers, kinsmen, a community. And at the very end, from the cross, he made his final arrangement for her, giving her into the care of the beloved disciple. From the moment Joseph died to the moment Jesus died, we see a son who never stopped making sure his mother was cared for. The responsibility he took on at Joseph's death, he carried faithfully to his own. And there is one more layer here, almost too deep to put into words. Joseph had spent his life as a father, protecting, providing, guarding his family, especially his son. And in a sense, Jesus took up that very role after Joseph was gone. He became the protector, the provider, the guardian of the family. The father had passed on not just a trade, but a way of loving, and the son carried it forward. Perhaps that is the quiet legacy of Joseph. He never preached. He never performed a miracle. He never spoke a recorded word. He simply loved, protected, provided, and raised a son, faithfully, humbly, to the end. And the son he raised would go on to change the world. But before he changed the world, Jesus learned from Joseph what a faithful man looks like. How to work, how to protect, how to provide, how to love quietly and completely, and how, in the end, to face death. Because he had watched Joseph face it, surrounded by love, at peace. And there is a comfort in Joseph's hiddenness that speaks to almost everyone. Because most of us will live lives much more like Joseph's than like the lives of the famous. We will not be remembered by history. We will not perform great public deeds. We will simply work and provide for the people we love, and try to be faithful in the small, unrecorded duties of ordinary days. Joseph's life says that this is not a small thing, that a quiet, faithful, ordinary life, a life of showing up, of providing, of loving without applause, can be the most important life imaginable. Joseph raised the Son of God by being faithful in obscurity. The hidden life is not the wasted life. It may be the holiest life of all. And it is worth remembering that Jesus chose to spend the overwhelming majority of his life in exactly that hidden way. In Joseph's world, doing Joseph's kind of work. Roughly 30 years in Nazareth, and only about 3 in public ministry. For every year Jesus spent preaching and healing, he spent 10 in the quiet life of a carpenter's household. He did not despise the ordinary years. He sanctified them. And the man who taught him to live those years was Joseph. Step back now and look at the whole quiet story. A carpenter named Joseph took a frightened young woman as his wife and claimed a child who was not his own. He protected that child from a king who wanted him dead, fleeing across a desert to save him. He brought the family home and built a life, and taught his son a trade and a faith, year after ordinary year. And then, in the silence of the hidden years, he grew old and he died. Peacefully, the tradition holds, with his wife and his son beside him. And the son he raised grieved him, buried him, and carried on, caring for his mother, providing for his family, bearing his first great loss the way every human being must. Before Jesus ever began the mission that would change history, he had already lived through the most universal of human sorrows. He had lost his father, and he knew from the inside what that loss does to the human heart. We tend to overlook Joseph. He is the quiet figure at the edge of the Christmas scene, the man who never speaks. But think about what he did. He raised the Son of God. He gave him a home, a trade, a model of faithful manhood. And when his work was done, when the boy was a grown man, strong and wise and ready, Joseph passed quietly from the story, his task complete. He had prepared the way in his own humble fashion, and then he stepped aside. And the love between this father and this son did not end at a deathbed in Nazareth, because Christians believe that Jesus would, in time, conquer death itself, the very death that had taken Joseph. The son who wept at his father's grave would one day walk out of his own. And in that victory, the grief of every father and every son, every loss ever mourned, was met with a promise that death does not have the final word. So when you picture Jesus, do not picture only the miracle worker, the teacher, the figure on the cross. Picture also a young man in a workshop in Nazareth, holding his father's worn tools, grieving the carpenter who raised him, and then drying his eyes and getting back to work because his mother needed providing for. And that is what a faithful son does. That is what Jesus did when Joseph died. He grieved like a son. He buried his father with his own hands. He cared for his mother, and he carried the memory of a quiet, faithful man into a mission that would change the world. If this gave you a side of Jesus you had never considered, the grieving son, the faithful provider, the young man who lost his father, subscribe, because we tell the hidden human stories behind the figures everyone thinks they already know. Tell me in the comments what moved you most. That Joseph chose to raise a son who was not his own? That he died in the arms of Jesus and Mary? Or that the Son of God knew from the inside what it means to lose a father? I read every comment. Thank you for sitting with this quiet story with me. I'll see you in the next one.